my creative friends, it's time to slow down and take an art break. In today's tutorial, we're going to be creating this sweet little whimsical style watering can that definitely has a vintage cottage type of a feel. It has lots of little pretty watercolor wildflowers in the background and even some sweet little strawberries that stick right out in the front. The beginning of the tutorial, I'm going to teach you some steps of how you can break down the shapes of this if you'd like to try drawing it yourself. And then I'm going to walk you through the steps of how to create these loose watercolor little bits of splashes of color. And then at the end, I'm going to be adding some colored pencils to add all the little scribbly bits to give it that mixed media feeling and bring this one to life. For those of you who'd like to have a little bit of help drawing, I know not everyone likes to draw. That's where I have my sketchbook membership. I have all the line drawings for any of the paintings I do on my channel. So I can do the drawing part, and then you can simply trace and then paint. Well, let's get started on creating this very whimsical style watering can that has that vintage vibe. And when we create together, I always like to remind everyone, it's more about creative joy and less about perfection. So grab your art supplies and let's take an art break together. So I'm going to be starting at the top, and I'm going to do a slight little arch like this, and then come out at an angle. That's where you're going to build your sides. Like that. And then again, this rounded shape here. Now to create that first top, now depending on how much you see, you might want to come around on your edges where it's going to look like you're going all the way around. I'm going to drop down, there's going to come straight down here, and then I'm going to follow that curve again. Then that's going to give it that rounded feeling. Now I'm going to drop down again and give it another rounded area. I'm going to kind of follow that if I can. My hand, I'm right-handed, so I tend to travel up with my lines. Sometimes it helps if you turn it to give it a little bit more of a general idea, or even put a tick mark off to the side so it gives your eye something to look at. But I'm just doing this quickly to give you an idea. Now that bottom needs to be rounded too. I'm going to follow that same curve that I just did at the top. Remember, these are straight down too. That's going to give that idea of that it's going around. So I'm going to come down and make that same little gentle curve, little smile face type of shape. And that's my bottom. Now when I'm looking at this, I know I need to come down here. This is where my spout's going to be, so I'm going to curve it in just a tiny bit. So this will be the space where my spout's going to be. And then I'm going to go at an angle up. And you don't want it like going straight up, a little bit more of a gentle angle up. Then your spout's going to be wider here, and it's going to get narrower as it travels up. Hopefully you can see like that. And then you're going to have this little smile face shape. That's where your top of your spout will connect. Then this is a cone shape. Now the top, to give it some dimension, you're going to want to go around. This is going to be a smile face shape as well. You can either curve it up like that, or you can do an oval. Either which one, that'll give your spout a little dimension. Now let's talk about this handle. We're going to start up a little bit higher. This is going to have that little knob that kind of curves around. We're going to come up and then curve it around gently. Now think about, this is going to be what is going to be the outside and what will be the inside of your drawing. You're going to come around, and then this is going to curve around. Okay, so now you can kind of see where I drew this as the inside, but it's going to switch. So I'm going to come here and follow back around and then come back up. So when you're drawing that first line, you kind of want to stay a little closer than what you think, because this line here becomes actually the inside of your handle. And sometimes when my brain is doing this drawing, I'm thinking I'm drawing the outside, but I'm actually drawing the inside. So you might want to take a look, draw this line a little closer to the inside of your water can before you begin. That's basically how you're going to draw the water can. And when you're doing, this one has some really cute strawberries in it, and I'll just give you a simple way to think about strawberries, is to think of them more of a heart shape, but a kind of a rounded bottom heart shape like that. And then you're going to put your tops on with just some simple little leaves is all you're going to do. And there you have a strawberry. And a daisies are pretty easy. I like to do an oval. And then for the daisies, I kind of like to do that little pointed leaf off to the side. And then I just go around. Oops. I get a little sloppy sometimes when I'm doing these. They can be shorter in the back, the petals went, and then you can get longer as you're going to the forward. That's going to give your flower a little bit more dimension too. So that's a little daisy. There's one other little flower. There's a cosmos flower, and a cosmos is very similar to a daisy. The only difference is when you're making the leaf or the petal, you're going to come up and do a little dip and bring it down. So it's going to have a little higher. And those are just if you want to add the little details like that. That's all you're going to do. And then the other one is a little bit of a snapdragon-y type of flower, and that's just basically clusters of flowers. This little painting is going to be done very loosely, and we're not going to get caught up in too much of detail. The thing is, if you're going to draw yours, is leave some open spots inside of your painting to be able to have some little splashes of color and not be so tight with all of these images. If you're interested in getting the tracer, make sure you go ahead and check out my Ko-fi page over there, and that's where I have all the line drawings. I'd be happy to have more members who join me. Let's go ahead and start the painting process. I already have my painting or my drawing already on here. I used a light box and traced it. I wanted to share with you a good tool to use to lighten your line work. If you want to lighten it, is to use a kneaded eraser. Kneaded erasers will pick up the graphite without smearing it all over your paper, and this is the perfect eraser to use. I also suggest keeping them in a little box of some sort because they're sticky and they pick up so much stuff. Now, if you're a sketchbook member, I'll give you the colors that I use, and I'll give you a reference image of the one I finished for inspiration for your painting, but feel like you can use any color you want. For this painting, I'm going to be using two little sets. I have an inexpensive set of watercolors that I often use, and then I have just this other one here that I use a few colors out of that, and those are the two watercolor sets I'm using. Now, for this one, I'm going to be using a round brush, a number 6 Princeton brush, and if I need to add super tiny details, I can always use a small little detail brush. And for big washes, I'll be using a number 10. I'll have some links down in the description box for the paper I use, for the brushes, and some of the paints I use as well. Well, let's start, and we'll start with the painting process. For my painting, I'm going to start with the water can first, and I'm going to be laying in this light shade of blue and then adding some of this turquoise color over the top, and I'm pulling those colors from my little set of colors that I have. I'm going to do dry on first, so my paper is dry, and I'm going to be putting wet paint on top. By doing that, it's going to keep my paint pretty much inside. Watercolor has a way that it always wants to follow wherever the paper is wet, and I'm going to be doing some more of those loose directions of painting, but for my water can, I really want my color to stay where I'm painting it. So I'm going to just do a dry paper underneath, add my paint on the top, and then while it's still wet, I'll be plopping in a few bit of the shadows in the turquoise color. So I'm going to speed this up and let you watch me as I paint. If you're new to watercolor, the process of doing watercolor is that you're painting the shadows. So this first color I'm laying on is actually going to be my highlights. That's where you're going to see the lightest, brightest color is underneath there. The brightest white is going to be my paper layer. If you have some of that showing in your end painting, that will be your brightest white, but this is basically my highlight color. Once I have that laid all over my painting, and with watercolor, the more water you have mixed into your paint, the more light it will be. So I'm adding basically a layer of paint that's mixed to about coffee consistency for my first layer of color. And then once I have that over, now my paint is wet underneath there. So I'm going to pick up a darker turquoise, and that's going to be my next layer of adding the shadow. I'm just going to leave little peaks of that color showing here and there, and I'm going to create those bars that went around my can. I'm going to leave those light. I'll come back in and add another layer of darkness to those areas by just applying the same color I put on first. I'll add that to the very top to keep that highlight color there and adding another layer of color. This dark color I'm putting on is basically mixed to the same consistency, coffee, and I'm just keeping in mind of where I might have darker shadows. So underneath the side of the handle, underneath those little bars that are coming across my watering can, and on the underside of the spout. I know there's going to be shadows there, so I'm laying that darker color in those areas for sure. The next area I'm going to be working in is some of the flowers, and I'm using more of a buttermilk color and a little bit of pink. I need to paint in areas that don't touch my water can, because if I accidentally touch that water can, my colors are going to move together because watercolor always wants to go where the paper is wet. That blue area is still very much wet, so I'm going to be moving and doing flowers that don't touch the watering can. And I'm just doing basic kind of just plop and drop color technique. I'm mixing that color to about coffee consistency. I'm plopping in a little bit of that buttermilk color and then just tapping in a little bit of the pink and letting those colors do what I like to call watercolor magic. It's going to kind of blend on its own and come up with its own color combination. I'm just tapping with the end of my brush, just doing those subtle taps of colors. These flowers are fairly small, and that's about all the color I really need. Once I had a few of my flowers finished, now I'm going to start working a little bit more on creating the feel of that there's flowers in the background without actually painting flower shapes. And I'm going to create this by watering down my paint anywhere from tea to coffee consistency. And I'm going to be just splashing a little bit of that paint in the background, just adding the shades of the buttermilk and pink over the top of each other. And again, because that paint is already underneath there wet, it's going to blend on its own and create those really kind of almost blooming areas of color. I'm not painting exact flowers. I'm just dropping in a little bit of that paint I used on my flowers to give it a feel that there's probably some in the background. Painting this way is going to allow a little bit more openness and looseness to this painting. That's why I said when you were drawing your piece, if you were going to draw it, make sure you're leaving some open room so you have some areas to drop and plop your color. Now that I added all those colors in the background, I wanted to give my painting a quick dry using a heat tool. That way I'd make sure my paint was kind of set and I didn't have to worry about this next layers of my colors just blending into each other. So I'm going to work a little bit on those daisies, and daisies are white, but you do need to add a little bit more color to them. And this is a loose painting, so I'm picking up a little bit of that teal color off to the side, watered really down lightly, almost very much a tea consistency, and I add that for a shadow color. Now I'm going to be doing the strawberries and the heart in the middle and a little bit on the water can, the same color combinations. And I'm going to start with this brighter, lighter color of my pink. That's going to be my highlight color. And then I'm going to be laying on that darker shade of pink over the top to create the shadows. It's done the same way. You're going to notice kind of a repeat pattern of adding the highlights, adding another darker color on the top, letting it dry to see what it's going to look like once it's dry, because watercolor always usually dries a lot lighter than what it shows like when it's wet. So you put your layers on and you build slowly as you go. Now it's time to add a little bit of the green, and I'm going to be choosing 2 shades of green, but also mixing a little bit inside of my palette, picking up a little bit of that turquoise to add a little bit more interest, splashing that green around in some different areas. Now I do have some definite leaves that are actually drawn that I used when I drew them in pencil, so I have some definite leaf shapes, but I'm going to be doing the same thing where I'm going to kind of just softly add some of that green here and there in the background and adding a little bit of that turquoise into that color too, just to bring that turquoise to the background and onto some of the leaves. And that's going to create that very much that soft look of that watercolor in the background. Here I'm just tapping in a little bit of the darker color at the base of the leaf, and it should travel up and into those areas. Because the leaf is wet, it's going to blend on its own. I need to put some sort of grass or anchoring for my water can, and I'm going to use the same colors that I did for the leaves. I'm going to use that same color down below. Now this is all going to be wet for a little bit. I'll actually dry it before I put the next layers on, but this is the beginning stage for the leaf in the background in the anchoring area for my water can. Now it's time to add the next layer of color on top of my strawberries and some of the other red areas like the heart. In the end, I wanted to have more of a red feeling, so I'm mixing up a little bit of the red color that I have chosen, and it's a little bit more thicker in concentration of my paint, but not too much. With watercolor, you basically want to start slow and add your layers. If you go too quick, too fast, and layer in a high pigmented color, you're going to lose that really translucent feel of watercolor if you lay on too much color. Right there, it was an oopsie. I went a little too far with my red on my red heart. So I rinsed my brush off, gave it a squeeze with my paper towel, and then lifted my color and tried to keep that color more with inside of the heart area. Now I'm going to come back and strengthen those pink areas and those different areas because my color on my flowers has faded. I'm tapping in a little bit more of the golden color into the center of my flowers in the cosmos and in the daisy areas. They have the same centers. I'm okay if my yellow kind of blends a little bit in that daisy area and gives it that real soft little watercolor look. Oh, I do have that little tiny little ladybug at the top, which is so cute. I used the same reds that I used on my strawberry, and I just popped in just a tiny bit of the color for the body. You don't have to do a black for the head of the ladybug or even the black spots using watercolor. You could easily use a pen. If you feel more confident doing those really super small areas, just use that. Here I'm mixing up a little bit more of that golden color, blending in some, I'm adding a little bit of the brown area to it, and then I'm just tapping in kind of more a little darker shade of gold, but not too dark. I still want that really light feeling, and I'm going to switch to my brushes, my bigger brush, to create that watery feel, and I'm mostly concentrating up on that left-hand side and just brushing it a little bit here and there, but in the end I still want it to have a very much a light feel, so I'm adding more water, less pigment. I'm popping in a little bit of that green too, just here and there, and filling in that space, not with leaf shapes, but just with the color of that green to give it an illusion of that there might be something back there. Picking up a little bit of that turquoise color too, that's watered down really well, and mixing that into the areas that I have painted green to give it that really pretty soft color of some green and some turquoise. This is very much that look of loose watercolor. At this stage, I gave my piece another dry, let my colors dry thoroughly so I can take a look to where I might need to add a little bit more color. And I wanted to darken that turquoise, even another shade on my watering can, so I add another layer. It's still mixed to about coffee consistency. I'm not adding a whole lot more pigment, I'm just adding another layer of color. Remember, this is just about having fun, taking time for yourself, experimenting, and finding out how your watercolor might work with your paper, your paint, and how much water you use on there. If you start noticing areas that have really harsh, dry lines on it as it's drying, you might have a little bit too much water when you're applying it onto your paper, and as it's dry, you're getting those little dry lines that are blooming. But you know what? Sometimes I like that look, and I'm not really going for perfection. I'm just looking to have more of a creative time that just brings me joy, and it doesn't have to be perfect to really turn out very pretty. I'm not looking to do perfect, and I'm hoping you'll embrace that idea of that. Just take this time for yourself and create a little bit of happiness. If it makes you happy to paint, do that, and don't look for perfection in what you're trying to do. Just kind of go with it and see how your colors move and create across the paper. It might be helpful to know too, if you're used to doing acrylic painting, watercolor is just the reverse steps. With acrylic paint, you always put your darker colors on and then you layer your lighter ones on top, and this is just the reverse. So it takes a little bit of mind shift of where you're starting and what your process will become in the end. So the goal is just to play with your paint, get your colors out, take this time for you, and just enjoy the process. And this artwork doesn't have to be for anyone or a finished product even at the end. It's just the time for you to sit and create and enjoy the process. At this stage, I've allowed my things to dry again, and now I'm adding another layer of the reds. Red is one of those colors, depending on what quality of paint you're using, it might fade a lot in the process, and you might end up adding more layers. But I'm going to tell you, go ahead and just take the time and layer the colors on the top. You're going to get a better look in the end, and you're still going to keep that translucent quality of watercolor. If you lay in too much too quick, it kind of looks more chalky, and you lose that real pretty watercolor look that we all kind of like, and that's why we paint in watercolors. So it really does help is to take a little bit of time and layer your colors slowly. This is a great stage too to see if you have enough of your medium tones of color. When I did that background, I intentionally made it very light, and I've decided I wanted to go back in and add just maybe another layer to darken those areas to create more of a medium tone area. In the end, you still want to have that contrast of light, medium, and dark. I also find it very helpful at this stage is to get up and walk away from my painting for a little while and then come back and have fresh eyes to see what I've done. I'm painting these small little paintings. They're close to me. They're looking down. It's a good idea to just take a little break. Even hold your painting straight up like you would view it once it's done. It's just a way to check your colors and see if you have enough contrast to create that depth that you're looking for. To add just even a little bit more interest to the background, I loaded my brush with watered down paint and tapped it onto my paper. My paper was dry, so those dots were going to end up staying more like individual dots, and I wanted to soften them, so I spritzed my paper lightly with water, and I did kind of wash out my ladybug, so I had to go back in and repaint it, but the red color was just fine in the background, and that was an easy solve. I just went back in and added a little bit more red to my little bug. Now's the time in my painting where I'm using my little detail brush, and actually I can use it to paint the little black head, add little tiny antennas, and even the smallest little black dots. But that can easily be done with a micron pen too, if you don't have one of these detail little brushes. But if you do have this brush, you can even go in and add just the smallest little tiny dark shadow along those stem lines and add just the finest little details. But that's all up to you, whatever sparks joy for you. If you want to add those little tiny details using a brush, this small little size brush can work, but I also like adding a lot of little different scribbly details in the end using my color pencil. Everybody has different choices of what looks good to their eye. I like the combination of both. I like some details using a mini brush, but then I also love the line work that I can get with color pencils that I can't accomplish with my watercolor. So I like the combination of the two. This is Canson watercolor paper, the 140-pound student grade, so a slightly smoother paper, and it takes the color pencil really well, and that's my favorite paper to actually do the little scribbly bits of the mixed media using the color pencil. This is where I took the tape off, and I actually held it up, and I decided I really wanted to strengthen my greens a little bit after I even had taken the tape off. So I went in and actually dropped in a little bit more green into my center leaves, because maybe you can tell from this photo, it's kind of light in the middle, lacking of the green, so I do go back in and add just a little bit more. But before I added my green, I did actually do some pen work before that. I'm using a micron pen and the nib size 01. Now micron pens will be permanent once they're dry, so it is kind of a perfect pen to use on watercolor, especially if you need to go back in and add a little bit more color. At the end, you won't have to worry about your pen marks just smearing everywhere. Now when I do the pen work, I like more of a sketch quality, like a handmade look in the end. So I'm just doing random areas here and there, and I still wanted that very much that light look, and I didn't want it to be overpowered by black lines, so I was being very careful, making sure I wasn't adding too much. I'm adding a few little seed areas inside of my flowers. I'm finding just the slightest edge maybe around the berries, but not all the way around. Just the slightest little edge around some of the flowers. I'm going to ramp it up just a little bit more, but instead of using a black marker, I'm going to be using more of a pencil line. It's a little softer and it is not as harsh as a black marker would be. I also like using my uni ball. It adds a really bright shade of white. I always think of kind of white as adding a glitter to the project. I want a little bit of it, but not a whole lot. So I'm going to add it just here and there. Again, going a little slower, adding that little detail mark. Now let's do a little bit of the color pencil. And this is where I like to add just kind of even a little bit of a surprise element in my painting. I'll choose a color that I might not have even used anywhere else. So I started with that plum color, and then I put in a little bit of bright orange inside of that heart. I'm adding those little surprise elements that you maybe not see everywhere else. But if I did add a little bit of that plum color to the center, I want it someplace else, so I do bring it up into some of the flowers. I look at how can I bring those marks or those colors all throughout my painting. Here I'm using my color pencils to even add a little bit more texture to my watering can. I don't have to be super perfect with my watercolor because I'm going to be coming in and layering in some more detail and textures with my colored pencils. So I kind of use my watercolor often as just the base and the under, and then even add a little bit more texture and depth by using the color pencils. That works for me and I really love the look. If you like this look, the more you practice it and the more you use it, you're going to find out what kind of marks and colors you like to use. So my advice is just play and experiment, see what comes to you and what the marks and the colors you like to use on your paintings. When it comes to mixed media, I've often had the question of, well, how do you know when it's done? How do you know how many lines and when do you stop? My answer to that question is always when you feel like it is. If it looks good to your eye, that's what counts. It doesn't have to look great to anybody else but just you. Just go ahead and experiment and play with the line work. This is where I come back to my number 2 pencil and add just the finest bit of lines and little scribbles here and there. I can come back and reinforce or find the outlining of my daisies. Because they're light flowers, this gives it a very light feel. I can come down into my watering can and just do some scribbling around those edges, and it kind of softens that black marker by having just a little bit of pencil next to it. I love this step. I love to scribble. I love this play of adding that into my artwork. It makes me happy to scribble. I think I'm kind of a preschooler at heart when it comes to my artwork, but I love seeing this subtle lines of going thicker and thinner and bringing that artistic quality to my paintings. But everybody has their own like. This might not be your thing and you can stop with and not do this part, but if you like it, I say go ahead and go for it. It's just paper. It's not a lot of big investment. It's a time to create. This is your playtime. This is your creating time. So pick up those pencils and create that free line work and see if you like it or not. Well, let's see what it looks like sitting amongst some of the other items I've created so far on my YouTube channel. I just love this little painting and that very loose watercolors and how the colors layer on top of each other and just have that very playful look. And of course, all that little extra line works just makes my heart happy. If you enjoy doing whimsical style art, come on over to my channel. I'd love to have more creative friends join me. Leave me a comment, give me a thumbs up. It really does help YouTube push my videos out there. A matter of fact, YouTube thinks you might be interested in this video. You might want to click it and check it out. Well, thanks for joining me today, and hopefully you'll come back and join me again, and perhaps next time you'll paint right along with me.